Hello. Okay, introduction. So this is the new video series, which is in two parts. It's called The Big Lie. So we're diving out on two things. We're looking for lies, simply, and we're looking to dive in to the truth. So this is, for want of a better word, Christian focus. So when we talk about truth, we talk about biblical truth. And the discussion on that truth side is, well, what does the Bible actually say? What does it actually mean? And on the lie side, we're just, as we'll talk about, it's not a discussion, we're looking for facts. So we've kicked off the whole series already, and we've started with truth, looking at the bridal paradigm. So this is the first video on the lie side. Now the relationship is a handshake, so as we begin to understand the truth, we begin to get less deceived. And the question really, I mean, it is kind of really, if you want to think of it like this as discussion, but really the whole point is, how can we be deceived if we know the truth? And if we know the truth, we can't be deceived. So the way you check that personally, because really what we're talking about is opinions and what we all think, not just facts, but what we all think about the facts. Some of it's opinion, some of it's fact, but like the point is how not to be deceived by knowing the truth, and by knowing the truth, how not to be deceived. So it's a handshake really, and it's like they each feed into each other. So obviously the whole series is to do with the season we're in, and this is what we're looking at. How not to be deceived, being in the world but not of it, by what's going on in the world. And it's a very scary topic. So the whole idea about lies is not something naturally I like to do if I think about it, but I think it's one that needs to happen. So this is the first video, and this is a real auger of a lie. So this is to do with the Russiagate hoax, which has been proved to be a hoax. Kind of timing is everything. So obviously I planned to do this, but I basically watched a Russell Brand video on YouTube. So that's the link, so go watch it. And in his, he discusses it and looks at the facts. So what we're going to do in this video is not discuss the facts, because they're in that video. So let me make you aware of that. So we're not looking at the facts. Why not? Because Russell Brand's already looked at them. It's pretty black and white what the facts are and aren't. And there's so black and white, there's no wiggle room in terms of being deceived or getting the wrong idea. So he went through that, which is why I'm saying watch the video. Actually, he makes some really insightful comments. So whether you like Russell Brand or not, they are insightful. So anyway, the truth's finally come out. As I said, watch the video for the facts on that. That the Russiagate thing, which is basically Trump's in collusion or has some sort of immoral or illegal relationship with Putin and the Russians, is a hoax. Was a hoax, is a hoax, always will forever be a hoax. And it's propagated by Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. So we're going to try and run through this as quick as we can, because there's a lot to discuss. So here's the unopening of Pandora's box. So I just kind of wanted to put my play on it. So just that is not a revelation to me. I knew that. Knew that a long time ago, because I kind of looked at it all. It's actually Russell Brand kind of doesn't mention some things that I would mention, so I'm kind of filling in the gaps. Not to say that I'm right or he's wrong, just this is his opinion, this is my opinion, so it's kind of a little bit like that, but based on the facts. So it's not even news, and this is the point, you have to pay attention to what's going on not what you think is going on because of the way it's presented. You have to pay attention to who's saying what. This is the thing. There's a very political left and there's a very political right. They're forever going to disagree. That's just the season we're in. We don't really filter news by the fact that the left-wing media are saying one thing and the right-wing media are saying the other thing. And they all accuse each other of the same things. So they're doing the same thing, all of them, everyone, but from different points of view. So what is their point of view? What is the messaging? What are they trying to control with the messaging? What are they saying with the messaging? That's all. Well, anyway, it's not a revelation. If you haven't watched the video, watch the video. You really will struggle to understand some of this stuff. I mean, we're going to go through the comments anyway, but you're going to be a bit like, oh. And you can always check, because we're skipping through quickly, you can always check what we're saying, what Brand said, what he said. So we'll go through his comments. Firstly, it's just interesting, Russell Brand. So there's these kind of two camps, and there's the people stuck in the middle. And never the twain will meet. Well, if you consider who Russell Brand is, so he's a comedian and he's an actor, and now he seems to be a social commentator on YouTube. That seems to be his thing at the moment, and Russell Brand is Russell Brand. That is either an description or not. But Russell Brand's very much in the lefty camp, not the righty camp. Yeah, he's come out with this video which basically says the Russiagate thing was a hoax, which is a real change in our season, because never the twain will meet. And it sort of indicates what is beginning to happen, and actually what within the videos we want to discuss, make it a discussion, what is actually happening. That people are beginning to wake up and not necessarily, they're starting to question the messaging and what is going on, and this is the whole point. So really, that's the entire point of these videos. Whether we'll do that or not is another matter. But the idea of the videos is to dive through all this stuff that we're given and say, well, these are the facts. Is that true or not? So his comments actually are not just insightful, but they're spot on. They're rare. So we're actually digging down on the actual consequences of what he said. And I think while he's saying it, so his is a very shorter video than my probably hour-long thing. And I've almost talked already as long as he talked. So it got to 8 minutes, I can see. So maybe his video is 15 minutes long. Can't remember exactly. He's saying stuff, and I'm like, that's really important. Well, you kind of need to stop and consider what he's actually saying, and we could kind of miss the point. So the whole point is, we're not having a discussion. This isn't opinion or fact. We're trying to primarily seek truth. So here we're looking for facts which dispute the so-called truth that we're given. So we'll just go through what he said. So way I'm quoting what he said is a bit like this. So we've got these paragraphs. So in the video, when he's saying stuff that we're not repeating, we've got the ... In square brackets, I'm adding what I think. Sometimes I'm actually just summing up what he said, but I'm not actually quoting him. So be aware of that. Some of that is quite straightforward. That makes sense. This is Tim's opinion. And then the facts we're going to put in bullet points. So let's just go through it, and then let's stop at first points, and then let's dive into actually the consequences of what he's saying. So the world moves so fast that there's almost no time for history. It seems like years ago that we were hearing that Trump and the Russian hoax theory, this idea that Trump colluded with the Russians to win the election, and he was in on it. That his whole presidency was a kind of Putin plot, evidence propagated by the Clinton campaign and Hillary Clinton acolytes that are directly involved. So actually that whole plot has been proved was propagated by Hillary Clinton and Hillary was Brown puts it, Hillary Clinton acolytes who were directly involved. It's proven to be a conspiracy. Untrue. Think about how much media you watched. I find myself in awe, gobsmacked, flabbergasted, startled by these revelations. It's a democratic conspiracy. So there we have. Russiagate was a democratic conspiracy. That's been proved. So the real point, obviously, is we pretty much all took this as truth per se, and we're told, okay, that makes sense. Trump got elected with the Russians, therefore blah blah blah. That's A leads into B leads into C leads into D, E leads into, all the way through the alphabet to where we are today. Will we actually find out what we just believed in and took as truth was a whole pack of lies? So it's a difficult place we find ourselves in, and we should therefore think about that, think about how we got here. And then quoting Russell Brand, he finds himself in awe, gobsmacked, flabbergasted, startled by these revelations. So it's kind of a, wait a minute, let's rewind the last 6 years or so. None of that was true. Oh dear, we find ourselves in a pickle. So this is more the evidence, as I said, bullet points. I'm still adding bits. Hillary Clinton lawyer, Michael Sussman, indicted for lying to the FBI, that's the Russia hoax, that he helped propagate. So this is the actual evidence that the guy who was connected to Hillary Clinton actually is her lawyer. And not just a lawyer, he was her campaign lawyer during the campaign. Was indicted for trying to lie to the FBI in propagating the Russia hoax. So there are lots of open questions which we actually don't need to look at really. It's obvious what's going on and who's behind what, because there is basically, whether we're going to believe it or not, some behind the scenes darkened conspiracy where people are conspiring. Person just didn't decide to do this and it happened. So that's the big lie. We'll look at that term later in another video. So let's remember, again quoting Russell Brand, how prevalent the story was. It sits on every late night talk show, all over the news, someone bombarded. So this is the thing. This is why we believed what we believed, because everyone agreed this was truth and we were bombarded with it, and then we find out it's a lie. So the question then is, what is the lie? And it goes beyond the lie to what helps propagate the lie in the first place to make it believable. And what propagated it to the point that pretty much the whole of the world was deluded into thinking this was fact when it in fact was fiction. So Russell Brand says, I want to believe the Democratic Party are reliable. This is me adding, they most certainly are not. So is the opposite true? So this is the point. We have fixed judgments about what we believe, and they've been proved not to be true. So what is then true? Is the opposite true? Clearly the Democratic Party are not reliable. So it kind of boils down to this. They are peddling the hoax. Trump is the problem. So this is the messaging all the last 4 or 5 years from the Democrat Party. Has always been the messaging since Trump came along. Is the messaging and always will be the messaging about Trump, given the current state of the world. Unless we decide basically not to just give in to listening to lies. So Trump's the problem. So is then the opposite true? That's the question. So again, back to Russell Brand. This is my ad. So he kind of vaguely states this. What's frightening is the wish that they seem to be seen as. So I've added frightening. It's terrifying. So because it's not true. Why is it not true? Because this is the way they propagated it. So it's this very black-white idea. So Trump's the bad guy, they're the good guys. But they propagated the idea that Trump's the bad guy in the first place. So it makes us ultimately question who is the good guy and who is the bad guy. And as we'll see in the video, we come back to this problem all the time. The resolution is like we need to think about how we evaluate this to the point of, well, that's not true, how much isn't true? How much of that is true and how much of it isn't? We simply don't know. So the Democrats wish to be seen as the party of inclusivity, diversity, truth and social justice and all great positive ideas. Concerns that these are all, including Russiagate that is, totemic issues, push the forefront to mask ordinary, regular corruption. That's a bit of a wow moment. So this is how everyone sees the left and the Democrats, and they see the Republicans or the GOT party, the Great Old Party, which is what they call GOT, as the opposite. So good guys, bad guys. So how can a inclusive, diverse, truth and social justice political movement all have all great positive ideas be that when they pushed Hoax? And it's how far they pushed it as well. So what have they done? So he calls it a totemic issue. So this is totemic, means whatever totemic means. Basically really important, critical, foundational to what's going on in our culture, that these people, these political people are pushing to the forefront ideas and issues and news which mask their ordinary, regular corruption. So we've got Russiagate, we've got the Biden laptop. So we won't go into Biden laptop. The Biden laptop is Hunter Biden's laptop, which incriminates the Biden family and Joe Biden, which came to service before the election. And the hoax was it doesn't exist. Well, it's now been proved to exist. So what it basically does is it ties the whole Biden family to Ukraine, Russia, and China with commercial deals. So they're very rich. They're doing these business deals. They're making a lot of money. So the hoax was that was propagated with the Biden laptop was this didn't exist. It was a hoax that's been proved not to be true, to the point that Hunter Biden's actually acknowledged it's a real thing. So they basically have his emails on this and have other stuff, and you can read the news, and it's a little bit salacious anyway. We won't go into it. But the point is, it's not the only issue of this. With the politicians pushing these agendas, and they basically try and mask or cover up their own corruption. With Trump, by making out Trump was the one that was corrupt. So we all live in, this is key, we all live in certain bubbles where we feed off certain types of media. So, though this isn't quite true, only part true. Basically it is, but there's a caveat. So, lots of wranglers. People over here, when it makes a left gesture, people believe in this reality, people over here, right, believe in this real. So this is the reality of a reality. We live in these self-contained bubbles which contain our own ideas, and nothing exists outside this bubble. That's the truth of the actual reality we live in culturally. So we all kind of coexist, but actually we don't really coexist, and that's the problem. So we need to come together to form a collaborative vision. This is the one thing that's not happening, except that you can't have nation states anymore, winding back of history to a pre-Civil War era, left versus right, or versus south. So what I'm talking about there at the end is like this idea of we've historically got the American Civil War. So we're rolling it back to a time where something like that's happened. But rather than north, east, south, it's left versus right. And what it's going to end up in is America splitting. If it carries on down the path it is. That is obvious to anyone who cares to look, but it's never commentated on. Certainly not by supposedly the bigwig media people, at least the ones with the voice and the power. So it's not quite true. So these bubbles are mainly maintained and contained by social media. That's the reality. So it's true, but not quite true. How's it not quite true? Well, they decide what's truth and what's lies, and they label it as such. And they want to delete anything, they'll delete it to the point of doing what they did to Trump, which is removing his profile. So, pretty extreme now as a gesture. So basically, we're just going to what we call cancel culture, which is going to cancel you by removing your profile from our platform. However, this is what the Netflix documentary about social media, which is about a year, 18 months old when it first came out, unveiled. And this is experts talking. Actually, they're quite happy to push whatever they push. They don't care if it's truth or lies if they make advertising money out of it. So they basically, all the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, even Apple to a certain extent, Amazon are joining in on this as well. Other people join in. So we've got these big tech companies. They're understanding what you believe in and they're perpetuating what you believe, and they're totally ignoring the fact versus fiction debate, and they don't care whether they make money out of it or not. As long as they make money out of it, they're happy to peddle whatever, as long as you believe it. So if you believe it, you'll keep clicking, you'll keep seeing adverts, and that's the point of these social networks. So in reality, they're not what we believe them to be. They're not these paragons of knowledge which are seeking truth, justice, and the American way, or however you want to message that. It's just simply not true. Lies are obvious, and Russiagate was a lie, says Russell Brand. Anyone could have worked that out. That's not even a revelation. So that's the revelation of that revelation. It's not even a revelation. So going back to the beginning, this isn't news. That's if you paid attention. Again, pay attention. So where does this go back to? So on the right you see a wiki page called the Still Dossier. It has its own wiki page. So what is the Still Dossier? It's written in 2016 by a Brit. It's paid for by Hillary Clinton, right? This is where the origins of the hoax come from. So the issue is how much did Hillary Clinton pay this guy to come up with this report, which contains within it the hoax. So the hoax actually we haven't put in here. It relates to Russians having evidence of Trump when he was in Russia in a hotel. So if we actually dive in the facts, ignore the hoax of what went on back then. So again, if you paid attention, you'd know this. So WikiLeaks published damaging online hack data stolen from the Democrats. So for us, it has two key components. So one is a whole bunch of hack data from actually Clinton's emails, which can incriminate Hillary Clinton on what she was up to and the fact of what she was doing was legal or not. The second was the Democratic Party. So the main bunch of information that got leaked was pointed to the facts, that the Democrat Party was colluding to have Hillary Clinton named Democratic candidate in the upcoming election and damaging her chief role, Bernie Sanders. But, by the way, I put, don't just suck this up for yourself, go find out, fact versus opinion. So the Democrats originally didn't even target Trump, they were targeting one of their own. And they were colluding to have Hillary Clinton elected as their candidate over Bernie Sanders. So that's not the most startling thing when you say it, but you think about it and think, wow, they can target Trump because they disagree with him, but actually they've done this before against someone within their own camp. And that says everything I think you need to know. So this is the point, that this isn't a war between left and right. It's between establishment versus non-establishment. It's between who is in the political elite and who is not. And it's the political elite who are the establishment, often called the deep state. So people say, oh, it doesn't really exist, it's just a conspiracy theory. This basically destroys that as being a whole load of baloney. Deep state does exist, and they're putting those outside. So obviously the point is why. So Hillary Clinton, this is the thing, was running a unsecure email server in her role in government, which was Secretary of State. So she's emailing all sorts of people. The server is totally unsecured, not set up correctly. Pretty much would have broken a whole bunch of guidelines, some of which may be legal, we just never know. Anyway, there's still dossiers there. So the big lie, who's peddling what and for what reasons? And we ask that question and then we find out, okay, what we're really looking at is the agenda. What's the agenda behind the big lie? So it's obvious with Trump. So firstly, I mean, you don't even have to have a debate about it. So firstly, why was this propagated? It was to destroy Trump and cover up the truths with the whole Clinton campaign relating to what the Russians, and actually use that and say, okay, well, Trump is a Russian mole, Russian spy, Russian whatever. That's the agenda. And why? To get Hillary Clinton elected. That was their whole strategy. Clearly it didn't work. So in reality, see there's this YouTube video, so we'll actually do that at the end. We'll talk about U2, funny enough, it's my favourite band, I love to talk. But it's the point that the truth of a lie can't be read in words, it has to be seen. The forms of lies that they're seen in this video, and clearly, so just watch the video, watch it now or watch it later. It probably says enough, and you wouldn't have to listen to me, unless you wanted to go into the actual details and the issues surrounding what we're talking about. But we'll leave that to the end. It's the whole point really that via the media you can just make the truth up to be whatever it suits you to be. It's not necessarily the truth. So today the peddle is simply this: Trump is the problem. So while many believe, so believe's got the word lie in it, this has to be true, it's propagated from a lie, and this is the biblical point. Lies beget lies, only the truth begets truth. Do we firstly believe it because it's true, or do we believe it to be true because of the hoax? And the fact that the hoax is convenient to what we want to believe. So truth goes out the window then. So this goes back to the point of this isn't new. So this is from the wiki page. It's talking about the allegations. So it may be the same. I think it's the same still, doesn't it? Wiki page. There's also one on other stuff, like the Mueller report, which we'll come to later. So it says some aspects of the dossier being corroborated. Particularly its main allegations that Putin and Russia actively favoured Trump over Clinton. That's a known fact. That's why they did what they did. And that many Trump campaign officials and associates had multiple secret contacts with Russia. So the whole hoax is proving that that's a lie. So this is part of the point. We're mixing white with black, so it's grey. So it's easy to be deceived. So we're mixing truth with lies to cover up what is a lie and what is truth. When we believe something's truth and then we connect it to something else which is a lie, we tend to just take it for given that it's truth, and that's not necessarily so. So it's the whole point of that mixing, which is why we become deceived. So facts or fiction that many Trump officials and associates have multiple secret contacts. It's actually fiction. It's totally fiction. Yet it's still out there on that page as fact. Why is that? So we have a problem, a question. Look at that. There's another problem, another question, another problem, another question. And we'll see how deep this goes. So we know the theory is a hoax propagated by what we call progressives, or what's known as progressives. So the left call these politicians progressives. So the Democratic Party contained a progressive element of progressive politics. But who's labeling who what? So this is the facts. For a US presidential campaign to have contacts, firstly they're not contacts. So this is the point. This is not unusual. This is usual that multiple people offered their services. So someone becomes a presidential candidate for each party. So you've got two candidates. It's quite normal for the people to rock up and just offer their services. So it works like this. So for Trump, and the same works for Clinton, Mr. Trump, I have contacts with XYZ, I can do ABC for you. So that is, again, actually a norm. So that idea of a problem creates a question, and that creates another problem. So this is the next problem. Within the hoax, does that actually include Wikipedia itself? Because that lie is then being propagated on Wikipedia. So the paradigm viewpoint, same thing, different terminology. I quite often like the word paradigm, but it basically means viewpoint. So what the whole paradigm is, what is actually fake news and what isn't, as we know it. So that's the problem, and that's the question. So the question is that page fake news or is it real news? Well, as we said, it's a mixture, but really it's fake news. So then the problem is, well, is that deliberate or is it just willfully unknowing? So we kind of bought into this idea so much that Trump's the problem that actually we can't think outside that box. So whenever we're presented with the truth that it's not, we choose to ignore it willfully because of what we already believe, which is again rooted in the fact of what was originally propagated as a hoax. So facts relate to source. So this is the point then, that what happens next? So Hillary Clinton propagates this hoax that Trump's involved with the Russians. So Trump's officially investigated by his own government while president. I mean, when it happened, it was, to me, it was a wow moment. It was like, isn't he like the guy in power? He doesn't seem to be very powerful. And what you have is the Mueller report, which we'll come on to much later. So that's what happens to Trump. Clinton, no investigation, nothing. Not for the hoax, not for the evidence within the hoax, not for her. There's been no legal or moral or news-related media responsibility on her for the security issues with her server. She had set up. So the Democrats, again, nothing. So remember that they're all willing and deceitfully manipulating what is a democratic process. So this is part of the problem with the messaging. So the problem with the messaging that the Clintons and the Democrats have always propagated is that Trump's the problem and he's the undemocratic one. Yeah. That is opinion. The fact actually says the opposite, that they're the ones who are acting deceitfully and willfully and trying to manipulate the democratic process. I mean, they were already trying to do that by getting Hillary Clinton elected as a candidate. So what were we left with? Ultimately, today a Democrat becomes president. So things move on. Have things actually moved on, or have they got what they wanted? So is that election then democratic? Question. So all these questions aren't for me to answer. The point is I'm asking the right question. So this is the Democrats' anti-Russian stance. So how much is Russian and how much Russia hoax? So the point is that Democrats aren't exactly BFF with Putin, best friends forever. They're kind of political enemies. So this is unraveling the truth and the lie. So Russian interference. So there was an actual plot, Russian plot, to manipulate the result of the election through social media. That's a fact. But then Democrats dislike Putin, call him undemocratic. So he's basically an authoritarian leader, big word. Then they're doing exactly the same thing they blame Putin of. So they're authoritarian as well. Who's the worst? And obviously Putin in their eyes is pure evil, but then in their own eyes, by their own justification of calling Putin evil, they're also evil. But here's the thing, the Russians are not pretending that they're not. The Russian political system is the Russian political system. They don't pretend to be democratic. They depend to work like a Western government would. And the same is true for the Chinese. So we can label them what we want, but they're not pretending that they are democratic. But this is the problem. The Democrats are. So the problem then becomes who's worse. Is the Russian-Chinese propaganda we have to put up with worse, or is it the American government propaganda monster? The Democrats? That's a very difficult question to answer, and it's based on prejudice, but we can simply see now what we would assume is simple to answer is so unsimple. So who's the worst measure? Who's the worst menace? Is it the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans? In the world this is. So again, the point is, the Americans are pretending that they're democratic while propagating this hoax. So that's the real question. Are they the real problem in the world today? So this is the point of left versus right. Conservatives often criticise because they don't trust their own government. And actually the point is, it's not about trusting a democratic government. They don't trust their own government from their own side. But this is the point. This is why they don't. They shouldn't. This then fuels everything else. So this is the result of the Russian interference. We kind of covered this a bit, but we'll go a bit deeper. So Trump takes all the blame. So what about Facebook? That's a question we haven't answered. So Trump gets an official investigation, and Facebook get what? So what are we saying about that? Is what happened serious enough? So we look at the hoax, yes, we're saying it's serious, but look at what happened to Facebook, certainly not. So there's unbalanced inequality. There's the point out that left say this is a really bad thing Russia did, but Facebook get off scot-free. So the point is that Democrats can do nothing about Russia because it's a separate state. Legally, it's a different entity. They can, however, do something about Facebook and Twitter because they're within the legal entity of what is the United States. So the issue is Russia use these platforms for their own propaganda, but the platforms let them use them for their own commercial gain. And this is part of the problem with the social media giants, the big tech companies. They're about as capitalistic as you can get. They make a lot of money, talk about big amounts of money, and then you scale it from millions to billions. That's how much they're making. And it is a few powerful figures at the top who are, the word is earning that money, unfortunately. So what happens with Facebook and Twitter eventually? They deplatform Trump, despite the fact that they actually help propagate the Democrats' propaganda for them, despite actually being the problem themselves. So there are all these people who are then involved in the problem. So we go from Clinton to the Democrats, from Democrats to the news agencies, to the social media giants, labeling content as fake news and not fake news incorrectly, and then deplatforming people because they just don't agree with what they're saying. So is this all part of the willful hoax plot? Are they deliberately doing this, or are they just negligent in what they're doing because they believe so badly that Trump's the problem? So this guy Michael Sussman's charged. So that's the first allegation of criminal impropriety. There's the second. So that's made by a special counsel, John Durham, who is investigating this, which is widely known as the Durham investigation. So again, this isn't news. We all go back to the wiki pages we looked at, and all the evidence is there. So this is quoting. So simply in April 2006, the attorney for Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, hired Fusion GPS to investigate Trump. So that all this stuff that's come out that's supposed to be true, that we now know is hoax, it was known at the time that it was people who are not impartial investigating Trump. So it's a political person in a political framework, whether you want to call it left or right or whatever, investigating someone who politically is their enemy. You can already see a problem like that without even thinking about what the problem is. It's like so blindingly obvious, it's kind of stupid. So this is Russell Brand discussing evidence. Again, January 2021. The guilty pleas by FBI agent Kevin Kleinsmith. So this is about the second allegation, so we're going to go into that. So he lied to a court in relation to a subpoena. He submitted an altered email in order to spy on Trump campaign official cards page. So we've now gone from Clinton, Democrats, news media, social media, into the FBI being involved. So again, the point is, are they willfully doing this? Is this deliberate, or is it negligent? And again, they just believe that Trump's the problem because they're quite happy to act illegally. So this is not quite true, I put. So that relates to how it's already been classified that we've seen that someone who's involved is an official campaign official when they just contact who offers their services. So Page isn't an official campaign. He's one of those nefarious contacts that's been quoted. So he's offered to help Trump. He then finds himself investigated by the FBI. He finds himself wiretapped by the FBI, who are trying to investigate these allegations that Trump's colluding the Russians to get elected. They're breaking the law, and they're lying about it in court. Pay attention, I've put. So this is the point. So Page was asked by the FBI if he worked in relation to Russia for another agency. He does actually. So this is kind of a just when you think it can't get damning enough, it gets slightly more damning. So this guy who's a Trump stooge, you would say, actually passes on information to the FBI, works for the FBI in relation to Russia. So Trump's a stooge, got a Page now's a stooge, now FBI are the stooges. You just follow the connections. Because the CIA and the stooges. So the FBI are investigating that. So he says he's worked for the CIA, he's passed information to them that he came across. So Kleinsmith, when he began his investigations to get the White House, stated that Page didn't. So he lied, basically. He said that the truth was the opposite of what the truth actually is. That Carter Page didn't work for the CIA when he did. That leads to the FBI illegally wiretapping Page because he's worked for Trump. Now, the whole problem here is how you can so simply, easily lie about someone who's supposedly a Trump stooge when Trump's the president, and you question, well, where's the power here? Because it's not in the White House, it's not with the president, and it has never been. If you question the whole point of how much power did Trump have, well, very little, because he's got all this stuff working against him in the background. He's got a hoax that's propagated by political opponents, which is then propagated more by news, which is propagated by social media, and then the FBI join in and propagate it. It's like the guy's got no power. So anyway, that's another point. Back to Sussman. So he worked for a company called Perkins Coie, a bunch of lawyers. So their major client was the Democratic Party, Mark Elisa, who's a major partner in that company, and that's who Sussman worked for. And he's the general counsel on the Clinton campaign. So he's the legal stooge, if you want to use that word, on the Clinton campaign that works for Clinton. And, you can fill in the blanks. You don't need to know what's going on to know enough of what's going on. So this is the Sussman lie. There's a secret server which allowed Trump to communicate with the Russian bank, and this is what he's selling to the FBI. So Russell Brand goes on to say, this is seen as a defining issue. It was discussed as an absolute fact, which we now find it's hoax. To discover this was propaganda, a construct, a confection by the Democratic Party. Russell Brand is very wordy, and I don't like his use of big words, but in this, he's like spot on. It's a confection. He's a bit of a poet, but then again, he's a comedian, so he's very good at standing up and telling jokes in very clever ways. So he's got a way with words and language. But the Democratic Party, who of course are now in government, is kind of beyond disappointing because you begin to question and query what other things may not be true that you've been told are true or fact. This is the problem. If you go back, okay, let's rewind. This was propagated as fact, and we now know it's a lie, and it's a big one. What else was propagated as fact? Which could be a lie. So the real point is, all this stuff in what's been broadcast to us as truth is pointing in a direction that. So the missing is that Trump's the black bad guy, he's the evil dude, and they're the good ones, creating justice and integrity, and they're the pillar of democracy. So you actually go back and rewind and question, go, well, if that's not true, what else could be true? Let's think about what else happens, which we'll do later. So people create certain truths in order to meet certain ends and aims. The idea that is of trust and integrity dissolves. What else is implied? If a thing is a kind of construct, and all information that's peddled and rendered is unreliable, so you have to question everything. If the conversation is incorrect and the messaging's incorrect, then other conversations with the same messaging can also be incorrect for the exact same reason. And this is a scary thing. What can we rely on? We can't rely on anything. So the primary function is to create a state where people do not query or question and go along with edicts and ideas that are convenient to the powerful. So let's just repeat that because this is really important. The primary function, this is what they're trying to do, the Democrats, is to create a state where people do not query or question and go along with edicts and ideas that are convenient to the powerful and are that powerful establishment, and truth is just lost and irrelevant. This is the world we now live in. That's what they tried to do. They sold it. It worked. And it's clear it worked. You just have to go back, rewind, and go, okay, that worked. So this is the point Russell Brand is employing, but he doesn't really discuss because again he's doing a short video. This is a longer video about that. So if they did this for the reason, what else did they do? How reliable are the facts as we know them? Our entire beliefs around Trump centered on a political conspiracy theory that too is a hoax, or is any of it true? What's fact and fiction? That's the question before us. This is the problem. Which bit's true? Particularly given all the powerful people and organisations in play that we've all seen. So all the messaging is going in one direction. That's pretty damn scary if you think about it. So the real question is how far the rabbit hole goes, because we are Alice. So back to Russell Brand. So it's peddled as a smoking gun proof of nefarious activity between Trump and Russians. So the FBI, then to Clinton-friendly journalists. 2 months prior to the election, Sussman met the FBI. So he meets the top FBI lawyer, James Baker. So this is a serious big win meeting. In that, he's providing data as proof of the hoax. And he's actually concealing his intentions. So he's acting on behalf of the Hillary Clinton campaign, the presidential that is. And actually he's wanting to be appointed in the Clinton administration because he's supposedly some tech expert. So this is what he's done. Why has he done it? What's he want out of it? Well, that's why. That's what he wants. And then becomes news. So in the news, you willingly and willfully want to believe what you're being told is truth. Talking about hoax, who's saying it? So this is the point that Russell Brand's actually specifically making that we've just made. So it's the Clinton campaign lawyer who wants a job. Do you think that then could be a factor? So then he discusses this. This is really important. So he says, we lament a class of professional career politicians that can't be relied upon. Now, I'd correct that and say we can rely on them. We can rely on them to be corrupt. Instead, we want a class of professional career politicians that can be relied upon. So this is the point in all this messaging. It's to make us believe who can and cannot be relied on, and that actually swaps the reality of who can really be relied on and who really can't to some degrees. What we really find is if the messaging, this is the truth as a matter of fact, if the messaging by the Democrats and by Hillary Clinton is that by making Trump not to be relied on, they are the ones that can then therefore be relied upon to stop Trump. But we've just found out it's a hoax. So actually, that about Trump's not true, and that about them is certainly not true. The Democrat Party cannot be relied on. So Russell Brand says, you can't have these relationships. So these kind of insidious relationships between politicians and between different types of people and politicians have been going on for a long time. And basically it needs to be stopped. So you campaign for something because you want to campaign for it, but it doesn't question who you work for and these types of relationships. Then people leaving this office to go to this office. So leaving this role in government to go work for that tech firm. So the point is they leave the role officially, but they're still being employed. So it's then part in the conspiracy, or the hoax, if you want to call it that, to those organisations these people still work for, who are working on behalf of the government to peddle these hoaxes. Leaving this role in government to go work for that tech firm. So it's all interwoven, it's all very insidious. It all helps to propagate the propaganda. But that's where we're left with. So as I said, these relationships need to be made illegal. Or if they're legal, you can move to this, you can't be involved in this. The law needs to be stricter on that. But it's bigger than tech firms. So it actually includes financial businesses, law companies, not just tech firms. So basically it's a backhander. And the backhander is these people have these relationships and they now work in these high-powered organisations and businesses. So the government can simply say, we'll give you this if you say that. And they make the propaganda credible, and that's the problem we have. So it is considerably nefarious, insidious, incestuous, and deliberately so. It is what Trump calls and other people call the Washington swamp. So the whole idea is, well, what does that mean? Well, Washington originally was a swamp. Forest Washington we now have, and it's still a swamp. That's the whole point, calling it a swamp. So Sussman's claim, this is his claim to the FBI, that he was a concerned private citizen. However, he charged the Bill Clinton campaign for his private work with the FBI. The FBI have said there's no evidentiary basis to believe that the Trump story. So the Trump story was then a fraud. So that's not true. We'll look into that. That might be what they're saying now, but that wasn't what they were saying in between now and when the hoax was started. So why, after it's been proved a hoax, why is it still being peddled? Because it's a good idea. This is what, again, Russell Brand is saying. So we've got to think about that. It's a convenient lie that reinforces what they want us to believe. So the whole dislike of Trump is based on, again, this is Russell Brand, this guy's corrupt, this guy's an idiot, this guy's a liar. And what's the alternative? I put Biden. So again, it's about alternatives. And the fact, if they can make us believe what they want us to believe about Trump, it makes them look like the knight in shining armour. There's a massive problem with that, which we'll come into in another video. But basically, they succeeded. Either he's corrupt, a liar, an idiot. And actually, if you just read the headlines in the newspapers online, New York Times, LA Times, watching CNN, they'll basically outrightly call Trump a liar or an idiot or make out he's corrupt. And if they're not just making out plainly that they're making the allegation, in whatever ways they're making the allegation. Anyway, despite all this fraud, this hoax played a significant role in shaping media coverage. It was then spurred on by Hillary Clinton. So Hillary Clinton repeats her hoax, even though she created it. So the liberal media then used this fake claim to bolster their narrative that Trump and the Russians were secretly in cahoots. The story of how they spread misinformation involves the Clinton campaign lawyer and a rotted and deeply corrupt media. Again, this is Russell Brand. So, as we said, there were lots of problems. This just doesn't involve politics, but it involves all sorts of powerful businesses and organisations that have a massive impact on our culture. And this is the problem we find ourselves in. It's very unfortunate to discover these things about the way the institutionalised corporate media operates. That information is received, not correctly queried if it's in line with what you believe. Would it be that it's broadcast as if at odds of that, with no judicious spirit, no integrity? If you actually want to hear what he said, check on the video. This is the point he's making. They're not querying a narrative. They're not interested in, and they just don't care about what is truth or not. It just fits their narrative and what they believe, so just go with it. It's either that or they're part of the conspiracy, and they know it's a conspiracy. It's that black and white. So in terms of that, what we're saying is black and white. So the white is the white is they're just going along with it and just peddling the lies and not really analysing them. But that's what they're supposed to do. So they're not even reporting the news anymore. Just reporting what they want to believe, or they're willfully part of the hoax themselves. One of the two. Or somewhere in between. But basically, the whole powerful media organisations do not get out of this scot-free. In fact, total opposite. So you look at political alliances, corruption, commercial alliances, to say corruption. So there's all this corruption between relationships. Excuse me, just sneezed. Simply, once we believe what they want us to believe, they can say all they want. This is the point. You just have to get us to believe what they say is true, and we'll just believe it. And then they can just peddle what they want. That's what's happening. So again, you look at political alliances, corruption, commercial alliances. So the function of communicating information is just pure theatre. It's just entertainment. It's just made up. Russell Brand says it's like wrestling. You enjoy this, but you know it's made up. So emails obtained by the Durham investigation from researchers warned Sussman his information was woefully inadequate. So again, why then are they peddling this information still? And why then are the FBI allowing them to peddle it? And what are the FBI doing about it? Who's peddling it still now? As if it's fact. So the only animus against Trump would lead someone to believe. Only animus against Trump would lead someone to believe such a claim. So this is the point. Trump's the evil guy. We all believe he's evil. Therefore, they can pretty much peddle us what they want. And they get away with making the claims they do. Because we naturally believe that anyway. Once you believe that one lie, that Trump's evil, any other lie about Trump being evil is easy to propagate. So Hillary Clinton again keeps on repeating. So she posted a tweet, makes that claim on Twitter, and it's a hoax. So the tweet is that Trump is corrupt, when in fact the opposite is true. She's corrupt. And the Clinton campaign is regularly talking about Trump and Putin connections, despite the fact they know that they created the hoax in the first place. That's where it is completely deceitful. So the hoax is up and running, involves the Clinton inner circle, is then spread to corporate media allies and friendly state security services. So this is spread everywhere in American society and in American culture and in all the key areas of organisations, whether it's inside the government and outside the government. This then is endorsed by media partners. So they spread it to someone naturally. They can spread it to, they spread it to someone else, they can naturally spread it to, they spread it to someone else, they naturally. And this is why we all believe. So it's basically a virus. So why are we suddenly hit by a virus and a pandemic? And is that the real problem? Well, I think question 1, obvious. Question 2, no. It's not the real problem. So then that leads us to question this question. So if then the evil in our world is being propagated by our culture naturally, and it's the culture, the virus. So we're drowned in one story after another, and this is the problem. So everyone's just spreading this, no one's really fighting against it. If you fight against it, you get criminally indicted because you're pro-Trump, and that leads lots and lots of serious allegations regarding questions of the people who are connected to Trump, what happened to them, who did that to them, and why, which again involves the FBI. So FBI are depicted as a victim, yet the FBI is Jim Comey. So actually what we find, if we look back, is the various characters, one of whom is Jim Comey, who at the time was FBI director. So he became aware that this was hoax, but chose not to say anything about it. He knew it was a hoax and chose not to say anything about it. Why? Again, he is willfully spreading that allegation, or he's like the rest of us. He's just bought into the whole thing, which is the real problem. So it allowed the liberal army of everyone, and not just media giants, to continue to deceive the public into believing it was true long after it clear that it was fiction. So Russell Brand said, look at the media. Do you think this is the first or last time this thing happened? No, obviously it's not. Obviously it's happened between when we now know it's happened and now. So how many criminal indictments on the Russian collusion, despite all the investigation, all the hypes within the hoax? 0. Instead, those who injected this fraudulent conspiracy into the political and media bloodstream of the US. So they're the ones that are guilty. So the propaganda is real. Again, ask the question of regulation. So there's no regulation. All these questions are up in the air, particularly when Trump's president. Obviously, Trump knows it's a hoax. He has insight from knowing that that allegation was a hoax, because he knows who's propagating the idea. Therefore, he knows who needs regulating and who doesn't. He understands the problem better than any of us could. So this is part of the point. So Hillary Clinton creates, or has this hoax idea created by whoever, steals someone else in the Democrats, or they just come together and create this hoax, but she's continually perpetuating. This is the point. So Tulsi Gabbard is a Republican senator, or was. It is or was. But Hillary Clinton called Tulsi Gabbard a Russian asset. Now we looked at who are the nice politicians, who are the bad. Actually, well, part of the nice politician group is Tulsi Gabbard. She's been attacked by Hillary Clinton, calling her a Russian asset. This is getting ridiculous. So this idea that she knows is a hoax is continually perpetuated. It's continually perpetuated again and again. So when will this stop? It's the same story today. Still perpetuating the same hoax. And it's their own made-up hoax. You've got to think about what they've got away with in your mind. It's like incredible. And it's all to do with our culture and how our culture has changed in the last 10 years to be a vehicle of where these lies can easily be propagated to the point that the news media will not report on them for whatever reason. And yes, it makes them look stupid, but they're still not reported in news. It's still reported by social media as fact. What do? We think they apparently mark content with dubious labels. They'll edit it, remove it, deplatform people, mark it as questionable. But they've never marked any of this hoax questionable, even though it's proved to be a hoax. So the whole system is entirely unreliable and it is corrupt. And this is the problem we find ourselves. So we talked about the Mueller report. So the Mueller report, you think, would escape this naturally because it's a proper formal investigation. Yeah, it has the same problems in terms of the government represent a portion of society, an important cultural part of society, but just being part of the wider generic society. They're under the same influences that the news media are, the social media, the political people are. So this is the official US government report into Russiagate. This is just a snippet. So this is the kind of this is the outline. So we've already looked at Carter Page. So the point here that the report is so good and so unbiased that it's actually using it's actually got a whole section Carter Page, and it's using the FBI information, which we now find out with the hoax was illegal, and it's reporting it as fact. So the point is Carter Page shouldn't even be in this report because the FBI shouldn't be investigating him because it's illegal. Yet the investigation was illegal, and then he makes his way into this report. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, I put it there, it's laughable. I forgot to laugh or cry about these things. So we've got to cry. So this is a conclusion. This is now what we understand. It's a false narrative about Trump being a Russian bot propagated by Democrats. It's further propagated by the political left, by the Democrats and Clinton acolytes of the media. It's then propagated on social media. And then the entire media, including social media, peddle it to the world. And then we peddle it to each other. It results in evidence in the Mueller report, which, let's remember, Democrats told us when the report came out, it didn't exonerate Trump. Enough of them knew it was a hoax in the first place, because they invented it. So they're still telling us Trump's not got off free. It doesn't exonerate him from what we're alleging he did, even though we know that he's innocent. So what you simply have is this: a person who's supposed to now be the most powerful man is investigated by his own government with the full cooperation of the FBI, although the FBI break the law based on the political hoax, and is pushed by the media, including social media, as real news. Well, that most powerful person, that's Trump, is labelled fake news, and ultimately he loses his presidency and gets cancelled by Facebook and Twitter. What's the real problem? So still, all of this you'll never find in any official news source. You'll never find it on Facebook, you'll never find it on Twitter, and you'll never find that they've admit they're wrong. That's the case past, present, and future. And still we believe Trump is the problem. So Trump may be a problem, but he's not the problem. So the fact is none of all these players can be relied upon. Chief of all the media, including news media and social media, cannot be relied upon, certainly to report the truth. In fact, they can be relied on to manufacture whatever narrative suits them, and they still are doing it. So on that fake news, so let's just remember there are organisations out there who are checking the news, who are establishing what the facts are. Maybe not. So this is factcheck.org. So this is the point. It's been proved that the allegation is a hoax, but the fact checkers are still reporting that. Well, we'll just read it. President Donald Trump and his supporters on social media are citing unverified Russian intelligence from 2016 as evidence that Hillary Clinton was behind the entire Russian collusion hoax. That is not unverified. It's now verified. Yeah, I can still find it as unverified on the fact-checking websites. So, who ultimately is involved in the fake news? The fact-checking news. So that's not even reliable. That's part of the problem. So you've got to ask who funds this, and what you find out is it's the same people funding it, the same thing. It's all interwoven. It's the same corrupt players. So we've understood what has taken place now. We also understand now, given the way our culture is, what will never really take place but needs to happen. So some proper investigations. So Hillary Clinton never has been investigated on anything, server, the hoax, anything. So Hillary Clinton, let's make a fact about Hillary Clinton that we know. She's the only known candidate to smear her opponent in the presidential campaign by creating a hoax. Has continued to use the same smear since. Democratic Party. So we knew what they were up to before the election. We knew from the information to do the server being hacked that they were trying to influence the democratic process of who represents them at the election. So how deep does that conspiracy hoax go within the Democratic Party? That needs to be investigated. There's no accountability on news reporting. All we know is no longer can the news be relied on to actually report the news. That they'll put the role of social media too, which is kind of slightly less important, but is more powerful. So they're the bigger player in all of this beyond the core politicians. There'll never be an investigation into what they're up to, what they're doing, why they've done it. In fact, all we've uncovered is a whole nest of flawed organisations that we can only trust to do one thing, which is be corrupt. So what we have is we end up with an elaborate hoax that's so interwoven it's still being propagated today as fact, and we've not yet discovered how deep this corruption goes. This is the establishment or the deep state. So what do we believe? We believe democracy, justice, rule of law, blah blah blah. Does that exist now? Do we actually live in a democratic society anymore, or is our society and the culture within the society democratic at all? Or have we gone too far to live in a democratic society? So that's the big question, which I'm not going to answer for you. It's for you to answer that. So the other point is everything that happens after this stems back to this hoax. So the narrative, again, pay attention. You can see the whole narrative. And potentially we'll go through some of the narrative. The Dems are always going to impeach Trump before they impeach him, so think about that. So this is a legal thing. It's a serious thing for any president to be involved in. And it involves him doing something immoral, corrupt, and illegal. So even before he's done anything immoral, illegal, or corrupt, by the bounds of what they can impeach him for, before they found something to impeach him, they're telling us that they're going to impeach him. We should have paid attention to that and thought about that. Wait a minute. This is what they're going to do. Now we understand what they've done, the hoax. What do we then think about them saying they're going to impeach Trump and then what they actually impeached him for? Which is a whole other thing we have yet to get into, which we'll get into at some point. So Trump's impeached. He's impeached twice, including after he's president. Why? So what's their agenda? But actually, the whole idea is he's a Russian mole who's bought the election and he's got away with it, which we now know is false. This leads to the election result with Biden, And finally, the so-called insurrection. So you have to ask yourself, if you take away the hoax from the beginning, there's nothing mentioned about it. If it's mentioned, it's proved to be false because there are enough people to say this is not true. It's a lie. And boy, what would have happened then? It's a lie propagated by Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. So if we forget that everyone knows the hoax is a hoax and where it came from, it was never out there in the public. And is there impeachment? No, there isn't. That's for sure. That's what I think anyway. You can disagree. Into the election result, do you think there would be the same election result? I think probably not. Finally, the so-called insurrection wouldn't even need to take place. So that there are consequences. So it's a domino effect. But really the final problem is who really regards as the insurrectionists and who's really fighting for democracy. Because the Democrats have made up this narrative that Trump's the evil one, and we always come back to that, and they're the good guys. But it's been proven that they're not the good guys. So actually, if we filter it out, is it in fact Trump? This is the question. Is it in fact Trump who's fighting for democracy? And in fact, they're the insurrectionists to democracy. Despite the immorals, the legal elements of the actual insurrection. To me, that the real question isn't something I even put on the slide. It's if you understand what's happened has happened, and it has happened, would you not therefore go to that event on that day, and would you not protest, and would you not therefore willingly or unwillingly be involved in the insurrection because things have got that bad? And we basically we all know who's to blame for that. Would Trump still be president without the hoax? Would the Trump presidency have looked like it? What would the Trump presidency look like if it never had to deal with it? He could just get on with being president. So we'll see in future videos. This isn't the only lie peddled about Trump by the same people that turn out to be a hoax. This is the real problem. The real problem is not them, it's us. Because you and me bought it and peddled it. We basically get to pick what our culture doesn't get to be by basically saying we're not having that. So what's the goal again? To simply make Trump the one who looks like a deranged psychopath. So in reality, it isn't deranged psychopath the people who really got it wrong in the whole story, us. Whether or not that's true, it succeeded. It did what it was intended to do, but we could have found out the truth for ourselves if we cared to look, because as we see, all the real evidence is there. So the conclusion is, this whole video has been about pointing out, is the truth inconvenient for us? For the point, we'd rather follow the lies. Which basically means, which I haven't put in, the Matrix is real. Red pill, blue pill. So we'd rather not deal with the reality. The reality will just make up the reality as to what we want it to be, and that is despite the truth of what it is or what it isn't. And the real point is, all these lies are in fact fairly obvious. That is, if we pay attention. So this is the point. The point is, we live in this matrix where the truth is inconvenient. We're happy to perpetuate lies. And if we don't want to live in that, we have to pay attention. It starts with me not being part of the problem itself. And evaluating all propaganda peddled for what it actually is. And whatever you think about what we said in this video, that's the real facts. We choose not to be part of the problem, be the solution, and we need to evaluate all truth for what it is, despite who's peddled it and what they're peddling. And the same goes for the Republicans as well as Democrats. The same goes for Trump as well as Clinton, but we've seen that we haven't done that, and we're not doing that, and currently the way our culture is heading is downhill within that. It's not going uphill, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. So in the next video we'll look at U2 and Zoo TV, so I'm not going to talk about it now. This is kind of a offshoot to this video, so you potentially don't want to see it, but I'd advise you to see it because it'll be really interesting. The whole point is U2 are messaging this and saying this is what Western culture is turning into, and it's turned into the worst form of what they were communicating it could turn into. So we're going to kind of look at that. It's quite interesting, particularly if you like U2.